It's Mark and Pete.
Welcome to this week's Colourful Conversation, a time to reflect on 2014. Well, 2014 was packed with loads of notable international events, and many of which we'll talk about in today's show. And with me is Pete with some thoughtful comments.
Yes, I've been struck thinking at this time of year, it's New Year's Day, we're having the change from the old year to the new. I've been struck by God's promises to us in the Bible to look after us and to be faithful to us. And one verse in particular struck me. It's actually from Lamentations chapter 3 verse 22. And it goes like this. Because of the Lord's great love, we are not consumed, for his compassions never fail. They are new every morning. Great is your faithfulness. And that just struck me because as we look back over the year, there are so many things that have happened that strike at us that seem like terrible things are happening in the world. And yet, God is faithful and will look after us, for his compassions never fail. So in the new year, we look to God, looking after us, showing his great love to us, and growing us to fruitfulness in every way.
And with that, as we were doing research for this programme, there are many notable points that have occurred throughout the event in 2014, and we're just going to pick one or two of them, and we'll go through them in chronological order. And back in February of 2014, of course, one of the most notable events was the Winter Olympics that took place in Sochi in Russia. So, Pete, what was your thought on the event itself?
Well, here's my thought. Looking back on it now, I can hardly remember that it happened at all. I remember that there was sort of controversy over it, but the actual event itself, I don't think I remember much about it, other than that there were lots of ice. There wasn't a figure skater who wasn't expected to, who was quite young. That's about all I can remember from it, because it was really overshadowed by controversy over it, because Russia had brought in a law which was perceived as being anti-homosexual. So that sort of controversy really overshadowed it on the news, and therefore, it took away from my memory of it. I mean, at the time, I took it in, but yes, my memory's gone now.
Yes.
Or maybe it's just age.
Well, it was a while ago, and you're quite right that it's interesting that something that was mainly a sporting event was overshadowed by, one, politics, and of course humanitarian issues, and you're quite right about the homophobic protest that took place. And it's interesting that Russia really, particularly throughout 2014, continued to be a topic of much contention, as we'll talk about later on. But interestingly, moving on, in March of that year, the Malaysian airline Flight 370, which was travelling from Kuala Lumpur to Beijing, completely disappeared from a radar in airspace and appeared to have landed in the Gulf of Thailand, but ironically has still not been found.
No. I mean, this is one of these strange, weird events that, here's a confession, that as I hear the news and hear the details of it, such as they have it, I start thinking, this would make a great film. I wonder who's going to make it. And then forgetting, of course, that we're actually talking about many people dying, presumably, as it's not being found. And it's a serious event. It's a real event. It's so mysterious simply because it's never been found. What happened may well not have been in the slightest bit out of the ordinary. It may have just have plummeted down due to engine failure or something and disappear. But because it feels so mysterious, it feels like a story. It feels like fiction rather than fact. Such is the world we live in.
Well, that's true. And it's interesting that, many people have debated, was it a technical fault? Was it a point of terrorism? I mean, we've seen, for example, in December of 2014, where actually a piece of software grounded down the whole of Heathrow, where flights could not come in and go out. So it may be purely a technical matter, but nevertheless, we should reflect upon those people who, we believe, sadly have lost their lives.
Yes, it'd be incredible and a great finish to the film. There we go again. If we found out they were all alive and living somewhere in southern India, in a commune.
That would be ideal, of course. That would be a great ending to it. But going back more towards the summer period, and of course we did see a huge sporting event in the form of the World Cup. That's the Soccer World Cup. And there were lots of incredible games, and most notable from my point of view was how many goals that were scored. And of course, as we know that Brazil, being the host nation, had full of high hopes. And unfortunately, there was one particular country that they came across that did rather well in the form of Germany.
The thing is, for those of the listeners who aren't in Britain or aren't, don't have a connection with Britain, they may be thinking, oh yeah, well, Germany is in Europe. Surely the British people will be cheering on Germany. But in fact, not only were we not doing that, but Germany is perhaps the one country in the world that the British people, do not want to win the World Cup, of all things. There's a sort of history about it. Partly because when England won the World Cup, which they did once, I believe, a long time ago, but in my lifetime, they did win. When they won, it was against Germany, and the German people ever since have claimed that the goals, well, one of the goals that allowed extra time to occur that Britain scored was in fact not really a goal, and the ball never crossed the line. So with that history behind it, well, of course, it's meant to be a time of great sadness for Britain. The Germany managed to. But I have to. My other confession is I can't stand football, so it was of no interest to me whatsoever.
Well, of course, there wasn't goal line technology in 1966.
No.
I'm glad that finally that there is some goal line technology. Look, at the end of the day, Germany represented Europe, and Europe effectively won the World Cup through Germany. But on a more serious note, shortly after that, going back to a very major event that took place, which was again, sadly, with the Malaysian airline. And this was flight that took place across
MH17.
Yes, across Ukraine, where essentially they had been shot down by a surface-to-air missile, and unfortunately 298 people on board were killed. Now, that again is an extraordinary event where the same airline had incurred a major issue there. And I guess that's something where we do know the outcome, of course, in this particular case. And once again, we have to have a moment to reflect upon those people who passed away.
Yeah, of course, at the time, it was far from clear what had happened to it. And there was lots of speculation about how reliable the aeroplane was. But in fact, it had a pretty good record, this particular make of plane and model of plane, and it was the people didn't really know what was happening. Then evidence came to light saying that it was probably a surface-to-air missile that was fired from eastern Ukraine. So probably, really, the blame could be laid at the door of the Russians. But we do have a habit in the West and in Western media of putting blame on the Russians whenever we can. So, although that is the consensus of opinion, it does seem quite a convenient explanation for Russia haters in the West. Yes.
Well, I mean, unfortunately, the issue between Russia, Ukraine and Russia is ongoing, and we hope that, particularly throughout 2015, that can be resolved, and we hope that those events don't occur again.
Yes, well, I mean, Russia is does do things wrong and is a bit of a bully boy, but I think what we need in the West to recognise is that we behave in the same way politically, and so not to always put the blame at the hands of Russian for every time something goes wrong in the world, or every time there's something unknown, and yet it's obviously some sort of human intervention, like that was a missile. There is also somehow an assumption it must be the Russians behind it somewhere, which I think we do need to watch out for.
Yes. No, that's a very fair point. Now, in August of 2014, there was a really important milestone, and that was the marking of the 100 years at the start of the First World War. Mm-hmm. Now, of course, It was known as the Great War, the war to end all wars, as so it was told at the time. And of course, that again is a point of remembrance. And ever since that we've marked that particular period, in particularly November, where we have the Remembrance Sunday for all those millions of people who fell during the conflict. So I think it is important that we do call out that particular period. It's incredible that when you think of it, certainly when I was at school, the First World War was a major part of one's history lesson. And when you think about it, 100 years, I mean, it sounds like a long time ago, but really, it's not that long ago. And I think that's another point that when we look on 2014, 2014 will be remembered, of course, through the remembrance, of course, all of those ceramic poppies that were put out around Windsor Castle. And that, again, was something that was quite a poignant moment, I thought.
Yes, I was going to say, as you were speaking there, I was going to say, the thing that struck me, the thing that I will remember from the year, one of the things I will remember, is that particular piece of art with those many poppies display at the Tower of London. For those, it may be that maybe the people haven't seen it. It was a big display that was shown in pictures all across Britain, and certainly you can see many of the pictures online. But this particular poppy display really hit home to people in Britain. Now, the symbol of the poppy, for being in remembrance of people who died in the war, started actually in the US, but was quickly taken up in Britain. And so there's that connection between Britain and America. That the idea of the poppy, so that image of actually ceramic poppies, so that they would last, the colour would last, being so surrounding the castle, and shown sort of artistically, being pouring out of the castle, almost as though the castle was bleeding, was very affecting image. And I've seen recent images of people who'd taken them home. People were allowed to take them once the display was over, taking them home and keeping them in their home. And I've seen a few images of people having them there. So actually, it's one of those things where you think, actually, this is pleasing. Not that so many people had to die, but that people still remember that people died for them and still have it in their hearts to be thankful that people died on their behalf to secure the freedoms that we so cherish in the West.
Yes, it was, as you say, it was the Tower of London, yeah. And I think that is right. And I think it's amazing how the combination of art and of course militaria can actually come together. But it's extraordinary that it's one of those memorable images that defines 2014. But of course, if we move on in time, there was a real major political event that took place, and that was the vote for independence. That's the Scottish independence vote from the United Kingdom. Now, as it turned out, we as a nation are still now the United Kingdom, and Scotland is still part of that. But of course, it was a very, very close-run fight.
Yes, it was a close-run fight, and a lot of the comments on the campaigns for yes and no, for leaving or for staying in the Union for Scotland was of how the campaign for them to stay part of the United Kingdom was very smug, right, a little bit arrogant. They just assumed that they were going to win and then panicked at the last minute and started to give concessions, because you're talking about the campaign for them to remain in the United Kingdom was effectively being run by the government, although it was the three mainstream parties, the two in the coalition government and the Labour Party, who were part of this campaign, and they really panicked at the last minute and offered more rights to Scotland to offer them to get them to stay in. And in fact, there was very little voice. Or rather, there was a very little voice chirping our heroes, the people we comment on a lot on Mark and Pete show, UKIP, saying that actually then it's not really any chance of Scottish independence happening, because the plans are to leave the United Kingdom but then to be part of the European Union, so you're you're still not independent. So there was just a little voice pointing that out. But the thing that I really remember is the panic from these mainstream parties when they realise, oh no, we've messed up. It's actually going to be pretty close. Although there were several percentage points difference at the end, they really seemed to panic. And it really hits home to you when I was thinking afterwards. One of my other blogs that I do is called The Good News Show in Britain, and so the initials are TGNS UK, and I would have had to change the name. It wouldn't have been United Kingdom.
That's true.
Left. So it would have been such a historic change. It seems to me personally it would have been a mistake for them to leave. So I'm pleased that the United Kingdom remained united. Well, so it's one of relief for me as well, not just from the mainstream political parties.
Well, I concur. And I think that this also ties into one of the things that on the Mark and Pete show that we've consistently tried to convey, and that is long-termism. I think that had Scotland become independent, yes, I think in the short term, possibly the Scottish people may have gained a little bit. They certainly obviously would have had control over their own destiny. But I think most importantly, in the long run, I think that we are much better as a united set of countries. So the United Kingdom, I think, is much stronger to really move forward in the 21st century onwards. And I think that the idea of independence probably hasn't gone away. I think that that's something that will be debated in the years to come. But in my opinion, I think we are much better as a union. So as we move on, in October, we certainly can call upon one very controversial subject, and sadly it has gained a lot of media notoriety, which is, of course, the rise of ISIS. And as we've seen in the Middle East, there have been lots of tensions, lots of issues. But one notable point that took place was the beheading of the care worker and the charity worker, Alan Henning, who sadly lost his life in a rather gruesome way, who was actually shown on video being beheaded. Now, he wasn't the only person, of course, that suffered from this fate. But at the same time, the issue with ISIS still remains.
To defeat these organizations, it needs to come on three fronts. You need to have the direct approach. You need to try and catch terrorists. You need to put them in prison. You need to have information about them so that you can track them down. That's one. Two, you need to have diplomacy, not just between countries, but between different groups, Christians to Muslims, governments to Muslim groups. And you also need to have a theological attack to show that this view of Islam is wrong, either from Muslims who take a more liberal approach, or from Christians who are saying, look, actually, the heart of Islam is flawed. It is a false religion. God hasn't told you to do this. And I know this because God isn't as you've described him. Islam itself is false, so this cannot be right. And I think that if we approach it on all three levels, then there's going to be a cracking of these fundamentalist groups as people leech away, as people see that it's a nonsense, as well as being barbaric and horrific.
Well, we certainly reflect on those who sadly have perished as a result of those atrocities. The year moved on, and interestingly enough, one of the biggest events that is still ongoing at the moment, of course, is the Ebola issue. And in October, a nurse assistant in Spain became the first person known to have contracted Ebola outside of Africa. Now, the woman essentially was there to try and treat two Spanish missionaries, both of whom contracted Ebola in West Africa, one in Liberia and the other one in Sierra Leone. Both died after returning to Spain. So, interestingly enough, as we know, there's been charitable assistance. Even Band Aid have, of course, reissued their recent song to try and build up funds to help with the cause. But it's interesting how that. Again, we talked about this in one of our shows, how long it took for the World Health Organization to react to this particular disease.
Yes, I mean, we did comment about how it took a long time to react because we felt that systems weren't in place to enable them to react quickly, and we outlined some sorts of changes that could be made. But particularly talking about this particular disease, Ebola, it's when a disease hits like this and you realise that this tiny organism can just wipe out many lives. It's in this particular outbreak, it's saying that more. I believe the figures are something like more than 5,000 people have died in West Africa. It shows you how we need first to continue the efforts to research into coping with disease, and second, how, because we know life is fleeting, it can be snuffed out in a moment, we really always need to have that long-term look. We need to have long-termism as part of our outlook, not just looking for this life, because this life can stop at any moment, but to be prepared for the life to come. So it gives us pause like that, as well as being saddened by that so many lives were cut short, and thinking of trying to help, and also of praying for the families and friends of those who have died, thinking of praying and trying to help those who are suffering from the disease and trying to stop it. We also can think about the brevity of life, and that all our lives will end just as these people's lives did. So it gives you a sense of the importance of preparing for eternity.
Yeah, and as a segue, interestingly enough, about life in the long term, just sort of reaching out beyond this Earth. Interestingly, the European Space Agency in November successfully landed a probe on a comet. Now, that's 310 miles from Earth. Now, that is an extraordinary technological achievement, and one of which I think that definitely merits a call-out for a highlight for 2014.
Yes, I mean, this really struck me, and as we're talking, I've got in front of me on my computer screen here some pictures that were taken by this probe on the comet. Absolutely amazing. And I'm a big fan not just of science but of science fiction, and this almost looks like science fiction has become science fact. It looks like one of the image I've got in front of me, which is black and white picture of the comet, actually taken I think shortly before it landed, so you've got the whole of the comet in front of you. It looks like a prop from one of those old science fiction, Flash Gordon or something like that. And you can imagine a little rocket with a sparkler in the back, a little firework in the back, on a string going to land there. Or maybe thinking of just the name of it's just gone for me. The children's TV show where they lived on a planet with a soup dragon. What were they called? The clangers, which I believe are coming back. It looks like a prop from a TV show, or some scenery from a children's TV show, and yet it's real. And when you realise the scale of it, you realise that what seemed like a polystyrene model is actually a massive ball of rock and ice. Apparently, that's what it's made up of. So it's incredible that they look at it. But it's interesting that they've included that the water that they found on the rock is the wrong sort of water.
Yes.
And it just reminded me of us in Britain with our railway lines, where people make the excuse that the train stopped because the wrong sort of leaves were on the track. Anyway, it was the wrong sort of snow. Here we have it's the wrong sort of water. Well, of course, water does come with in different forms, and the amount of heavy water to normal water. I'm not sure actually what they meant by it, but that sort of thing can lead you to say, this water didn't come from the same place as the water on Earth. So the water on Earth didn't come from comets. And if you want to hear about another theory about where the water came from, you can listen to the Good News Show, where I talk about that. And basically, I talk about the fact that there's a lot of water stored under the Earth in rock, which is of the right sort, and
Yes.
could be where water originally came from on the Earth. So, fascinating scientific developments, scientific discoveries of this comet, and the less reported one of the finding of this rock layer under the Earth, which has loads of water chemically stored in it. Just has so many ramifications for fans of science, for fans of science fiction. This was a great year.
Yes, I agree. And it certainly was a great way to end the year. So we've looked back upon 2014, and we've seen some good, and typically we've seen a lot of bad. So what I thought I would do this time is have a reflective poem, which I think was a little bit more poignant about some of the things that have gone on throughout the year. So this poem, listeners, is called Shepherds Rejoice. Soft winds disperse the shepherd's purse, that flowers in flocks through passing days. Heartfelt buds grasp life's sweet beauty from the year's pasture's praise. The universe with time is terse, our memories and endeavours all aligned. Remember those who have come, and the ones we left behind. We cannot rehearse or deeds reverse, the furrows of fortunes ploughed and sown. In fields rejoice, the harvest's choice, the fruits of friendship grown. Lady ferns converse as foxtails traverse across blissful meadow moments in play. The clustered bell blossoms ring aloud, give thanks to the Lord, we pray. Misfortune's curse, in whispered verse, soon silenced by the prosperous clover, a radiant dawn of New Year's hopes as the shepherd watches over. So there's a lot that we can certainly think about in 2014, and we all look forward to 2015. And for listeners, we would like to hear about what you thought was the highlight for your year. What was good, what was bad, what was funny, what was sad. So, Pete, do you have any final thoughts on what you thought as the highlight for 2014?
Well, the highlight for 2014 for me, as I was saying, was that scientific discovery. And it's, for me, looking back on 2014, personally, it was a very good year. There was changes in my career, which are looking good for me, and I'm thanking God for the blessings upon me. But for the world, where as soon as we get more knowledge, and knowledge is power, I just thank God that we're still proceeding in building up our knowledge of the world and how it works. And so that big scientific discovery for me was the high point of the year. And I just hope that in the year to come, more science fiction becomes science reality. I'm just hoping that the Daleks aren't real in Doctor Who.
Well, look, listeners, we want to hear from you. So join us again next time for more colourful conversations with Mark and Pete.